Declaration of Stage 1 water supply condition.
Morning, Mr. Chair and Water Commissioners. My name is Kelly Dyer. I'm the Water Supply Manager, and I'll be discussing Declaration of Stage 1 water supply condition. I will be running through this fairly quickly, so I apologize. I may actually skip some slides. But we will be going over drought status, demand status, status of water supply sources, water supply planning and strategy, and then our recommendation. So we've had above normal rainfall for the year, which has been good news for our surface water reservoirs. At this point, the federal drought monitor is showing our areas not being in a drought. This is based on climate conditions, and I would like to remind everyone we've had the 7 driest consecutive years on record in the Santa Barbara region. So while our climate conditions have improved, our water supplies can take several years to recover from the drought impacts that we experienced. Our demand status, we're currently seeing a 35% reduction for the month of February, so that's great reduction, and the 30% 12-month running average. So the community has continued with this extraordinary conservation levels. Our water sales have actually dipped down in recent months, and we are projecting to end the year a little bit below what was planned. That's all being factored into our budget discussions for the next fiscal year. What we're seeing is that the Tier 2 and Tier 3 water use was actually coming in less than what was originally assumed in our rate study. Water supply status, so Gibraltar is full and still spilling, and water quality was pretty challenging after some of the storms, but it has now cleared up. So we have been diverting consistently, and actually the diversions have been up to our full limits that were allowed on a monthly basis. So that's been really great to see. Cachuma Reservoir is currently at 77% of capacity, about 150,000 acre feet. The city's portion of that is about 8,400. That's a combination of carryover from last year plus the 20% allocation from the Bureau of Reclamation. And the status is actually outdated at this point. We had requested a 100% allocation. The county supported that request, and the Bureau of Reclamation issued a final determination of a 100% allocation for this water year. So that did come through. Cachuma's storage levels are at about, 77% full, which is not, normally we would like to see Cachuma being totally full. It's when we consider the beginning of a potential drought or dry period. So we do our supply planning based on a multi-year period, and if you look at Cachuma's storage levels where they are right now, if they were not to go up anymore, then we would expect that the levels, if we had subsequent dry years, that the levels may go back down to around 100,000, which is where we start seeing reductions in our Cachuma allocation. So, we're not counting on a full allocation from the Cachuma project for several years in our planning period, and we expect that reduced allocations could happen within 1 to 2 years if dry conditions return. State water current allocation is at 70%. San Luis Reservoir is currently spilling. Although there's no risk of the city's water spilling, we were able to get our water out before there was any loss to spill, and we also did an exchange with the city of Solvang to try and save their water. And Article 21 water is available, which is water that becomes available during spill, but we are not able to take it because our state water deliveries to Cachuma are still interrupted. CCWA is working with Reclamation to try and get that resolved as soon as possible. We are no longer going to be seeking supplemental water purchases for our own demands this year, but we are looking for opportunities to pay down our water debt, which is currently at about 3,700 acre feet. Groundwater levels remain low. We did have an in-depth discussion on groundwater in previous meetings, so I'm not going to go over that. We do continue to monitor our seawater intrusion and water levels regularly. We're resting the basins, although we are planning some maintenance on one of our wells this summer, so we will have to run one well for about 3 to 4 months to do rehab and maintenance on it. Full recovery of the basin is expected to take 5 to 10 years. That's based on our observations of water levels after the last drought. And we are initiating a pilot study right now to enhance the recharge to the basin by taking treated water off of our distribution system and injecting that into the groundwater basin. So we will be working on that over this summer. Desal plant continues to operate in full production. It is a critical water supply for the city. And even as we move out of the dry conditions we've been experiencing, the desal plant still has a role for us in the drought recovery, to the extent it can help us to offset use of our groundwater basins and help those basins recover, and also to pay off some of our water debt. Recycled water plant is still in production, meeting all of our customer demands, and we still continue to work through legal remedies to address the capacity issues, which that has not yet been resolved. So our water supply strategy is based on our long-term water supply plan, which was adopted in 2011. We are planning to update our long-term water supply plan and kick that off next fiscal year. But it is a strategy document. It looks at long-term supply and demands through 2030. It sets the policies for how we manage our supplies, and it has a drought planning, how we manage our supplies during droughts particularly. The city also has a water shortage contingency plan. That's a state-required plan every 5 years. And that's where we outline 3 levels of water shortage and how we're going to achieve the demand reductions that we would need at various levels of water shortages. And I'll go through those a little later. So our updated water supply strategy, I would like to first mention, after the last drought, we did not see a rebound in our water demands to what they were before the drought. And I think we would expect that to be the case this time around as well. So even though what we're planning for here from a supply perspective is based on pre-drought demands, we don't actually expect that to occur. What we're seeing also is that there's no water shortage. And so assuming our demands were to rebound fully in May, we have sufficient supplies to meet all of those demands. We're encouraging continued conservation and extraordinary conservation because that would help us with not having to use our groundwater and helping the basins recover. And it would also help us free up state water where we could use that water for repayment of water debt instead of having to have it delivered for our demands. We are planning to continue to operate the desal plant at this point. We've got the light blue is Gibraltar and the dark blue is Cachuma. So these projections assume dry conditions would return, so we have very limited supplies from Gibraltar. And then for Cachuma, we have a 100% allocation this year, and then primarily what's in future years is our carryover, and as well as I think I assumed an 80% allocation for next year. It's uncertain what our allocations will be in future years at this point. So, summary of our supply outlook, no water shortage projected for the next 3 years. Some supplies will take several years to recover with our groundwater replenishment. We have to repay our water debt, and there's also fire impacts to Gibraltar water quality. While we've had an improvement in the last month or so, sometimes it really depends on how the rain falls and how the inflows occur to Gibraltar. So there's some uncertainty on what, we just don't really know what to expect in future years on that. And so with all of that said, continued conservation and desalination operation will help us recovering from those long-term impacts of drought. And then finally, while Cachuma is not full, subsequent allocations may be reduced if dry conditions return. So what does that mean for our water shortage contingency plan? We have a full allocation from Cachuma, although we are uncertain whether dry conditions will return, and we may if Cachuma levels are going to decline in the next couple of years. And we've also got issues with some of our supplies that still are in drought recovery mode. And so what we're recommending is a stage 1 water supply condition. These are all of the conditions outlined in our plan, where we'd have stage 1 is a 0 to 15% demand reduction, stage 2 is 15 to 25, and then stage 3 is 25 or more. So we're no longer in an emergency condition, which means that we can rescind the stage 3 emergency resolution, which established drought water use restrictions that were included in the packet. We could revise that to a stage 1 condition and encourage the extraordinary conservation on a voluntary basis. So we are looking for a recommendation. This would be going to council on April 9th for them to adopt a resolution declaring a stage 1 water supply condition and repealing resolution number 17017.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had this down as a presentation, not a recommendation.
We are looking for a recommendation today. Yes.
So, comments from commissioners? Go ahead.
Appreciated the framing of this as climate condition versus water supply, with the drought specifically. When we're talking about water supply, yes, we've got more supplies, but there are still some concerns specifically around groundwater, and conservation is still important, even though I will support going back to a stage 1, but I don't think we should. I appreciate your emphasis on conservation. I think we need to stay there, and as a community, it just gives us more options going forward if we can maintain a lower water usage as we go. One comment on the staff report on page 3 under recycled water, it has the plant was shut down periodically in the summer. So periodically can mean occasionally, but it can also mean regularly occurring intervals. So I think that periodically is the wrong word for that. It also didn't. Yeah, that was pretty serious. It kind of just glances over the fact that there's those issues with the recycled plant. You could even just take out the word periodically. I think that might help it overall. But we do continue to have issues with that recycled water plant, and I think that's something that people should know, because once again, when dry conditions return, which they will, that's a vital resource for us, and it hasn't been a reliable, vital resource. It's been a problematic resource. So just again, kind of getting back to that idea of conservation and continued habits. But yeah, it seems like everything's in place to take a breath, which is nice. So thank you very much for the effort that went into the planning, putting this together. Thank you.
I just like that there's no red bar in that water supply chart anymore. We don't have to fight whether it goes at the top or down below. So it's nice to see that.
Actually, I missed the red bar. So I get this. They get to stage 1. We clearly qualify, but I don't like the bar chart now because it references a return back up to 15 or 16,000 acre feet a year, as if we could use those yellow sections of groundwater. I know you get the second little thing there where you do the little thing over there and say encouraging whatever, and it'll take up this much. But to me, the first part of that slide before the little red part comes on just totally misrepresents. I don't know. It gives me opportunity to say, hey, I can use more water, and I think the yellow sections and the protection of the 5 to 10 years of replenishment of groundwater still remain an important enough component to not even put those on the next 2 water years, to just say, hey, they aren't available. You know, we need to, it would take going out of this category of stage, back to a stage 2 or stage 3, to put those yellow bars back in there. And so if you're going to call it a stage 1 condition, then you should actually take those yellows out of there and say, if we're in stage 1, we're not going to use our groundwater. And that would really reduce those back down to whatever, 12 or 11,000 acre feet, something like that. And the other part about just the display also has to do with recycled water. So you're meeting it now, but you know there's a deficit coming in the summer, right? You won't be able to meet the demand that would be out there for recycled water, right? When it comes to summer hot watering.
Well, we'll see how much it comes back. So far, we've been working with our customers to reduce their usage. A lot of it is parks and schools, and they can't afford our recycled water at this point. So that has helped bring it down. But I think if they could afford it, they would use more.
So I guess my suggestion would be at the point where that starts, you're only producing whatever that was, 1.5, 1.7, but the need is 2.3, that 0.6 should be showing somewhere else on those bars, because it's kind of just as a kind of a highlight that it's coming from somewhere else, and it shouldn't be. And we should be reminded of that every month, that there's a reason behind that, and that's part of your negotiations and litigation, and that should still be a priority to resolve in our favor, because that should have been water that was available and not have to go out and get it from another source. Yeah. Megan?
I was just going to say, I think that's part of the bigger policy discussion we have with the long-term water supply plan, right? Like, I think where that water comes from. And there's been requests for more recycled water, but we've put them off because we haven't been able to, we've barely been making them. So I think that's kind of a bigger policy discussion. I agree with your point, though, about not using groundwater during stage 1, not planning to use groundwater right now. I think that's a good point. To remind people that we really need to rest our groundwater basins, and then that would encourage more conservation, even at a smaller level.
Maybe on your presentation, spend less time on the first part of that slide and get to that part where the red part jumps out there really quick, right? I don't know.
Commissioner Keller did send me his comments, and he was in support of and wished we could have landed with a 20% conservation, and his points were that is likely where the community probably is going to be. Even if you lift all this stuff, he doesn't see people going down that low. But I think the point is here, we're moving to a stage in which we need to, what I think we're sensitive to is when we need that kind of enhanced conservation, we need our community to step up, and we don't want to abuse that with them. And at this point, we are in a position that we do have more water. I'd love community to continue to conserve, but we do have more water, and we need to recognize that move. But at the same time, it could come back in a couple of years, and at that point, we need you to step back up again. So,
you and I quibble over that. I just think it allows too much mischief. I just think, there's so much of that top part of the bar there that I think is not conservation talk anymore. It's just reality, and it shouldn't be a question of coming back to conservation or not. It should that number, the top of that bar should just be lower as a matter of baseline now, rather than it's 20 points of conservation and we need 10 more. No, the 20 points should be the baseline normal now and expected, and then the conservation should be on top of that. So it's I think we're just.
Well,
different way of phrasing, getting to the same place.
And I think what will help is, the commission has already approved a budget this next year that has $500,000 in there, and we're moving forward with update to our long-term water supply plan, which will allow us to use a different number than now, because it's kind of odd to show something different when we have a plan that has 14 in it. So, but I share your concerns with that, and I think we need to get that addressed on that path.
So,
entertain.
Go ahead.
Along those lines, it was talking about if we're moving to the stage 1, I talked about a voluntary participation. Do we need to say that, or can we just say we're stage 1 and continue to conserve? I don't know. It was like a couple slides back. I don't know. I just didn't like the way it was worded. So
This.
It's always been quote
How about we
unquote
just
voluntary
encourage
anyhow, hasn't it?
continued
So
conservation? Does it have to be voluntary if we're in a stage one?
Yes. Stage 1 is a voluntary stage.
Okay.
It means, yeah, we're not going to be all those additional rules and actions that people have taken, and they may continue to practice, which we would encourage. But if they're not doing them, we aren't going to be going out and issuing fines or NOVs if there's repeated actions.
Okay.
So
Okay, entertain a motion to recommend.
We'll make a motion to.
Thank you.
could I just make one note in the staff report? There's a professional services for legal water rights, and the Water Commission had already reviewed that item a couple months back, so that's why I didn't cover it in the presentation today. But it is going to City Council, so I think I had already included in the staff report that you made a recommendation to approve the increase in the legal services contract for water rights, and so today we just would need the recommendation on the stage 1 declaration.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
You second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. Are there any subcommittee reports?